It all began one quiet summer night in a small town in Montana. My name is Chris, and I've been a police officer for 12 years. I thought I had seen everything. Drug busts gone wrong, horrific accidents, and even some downright strange incidents. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that night. I was assigned to patrol the outskirts of town, the kind of area where the roads wind endlessly through thick forests, and cell phone reception is more of a hopeful suggestion than a reality. My partner, Lisa, was supposed to join me, but she called in sick last minute. I figured it'd be a quiet shift, maybe some deer wandering into the road, or a drunk driver trying to avoid the main highways. Around 1:15 a.m., dispatch radioed in, their voice unusually tense. Unit 221, we've got a report of a suspicious vehicle parked near the old Carter farmhouse. Caller says it's been there for over an hour with its lights off. The Carter farmhouse. Just the name made me shudder. It had been abandoned for decades after the family mysteriously disappeared in the 1980s. Local legends claimed it was haunted, but I always chalked it up to bored kids spinning ghost stories. Still, the place had a reputation, and I wasn't thrilled about checking it out alone. "Copy that, dispatch," I replied, forcing a steadiness into my voice. The drive out there was uneventful, but the deeper I got into the woods, the heavier the air seemed to feel. The narrow dirt road leading to the farmhouse was barely lit by my cruiser's headlights, and the silence was suffocating. Not even the usual chirping of crickets or rustling of leaves. Just nothing. When I finally arrived, I saw the vehicle, a rusted old pickup truck, parked at an odd angle near the driveway. Its headlights were off, and the driver's door was slightly ajar. "Dispatch, I've got visual on the vehicle. Looks abandoned. Running a plate check now." As I stepped out of the cruiser, a chill ran down my spine. The air was cold, much colder than it should have been for a summer night. I approached the truck cautiously, one hand on my flashlight, the other resting on my holstered gun. The inside of the truck was a mess. Fast food wrappers, empty beer cans, and a stained flannel shirt tossed across the passenger seat. But no sign of anyone. No wallet, no keys, no cell phone. Nothing to indicate who might have been driving it. That's when I noticed the footprints. They led from the driver's side of the truck into the tall grass and toward the Carter farmhouse. They were deep, as if the person had been running, and they stopped abruptly at the edge of the porch. "Dispatch, no sign of the driver. Looks like they headed toward the house. I'm going to check it out." I regretted those words the moment they left my mouth. The Carter farmhouse loomed in the darkness, its windows like hollow eyes staring back at me. The wooden steps creaked ominously as I made my way up to the front door, which was slightly ajar. "Hello? Police department," I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally. No response. Pushing the door open, I was hit by the stench of mildew and something far worse, rot. The kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and lingers in your nose long after you've left. My flashlight illuminated the dusty interior, revealing furniture covered in white sheets, as though the family had planned to return, but never did. The footprints continued inside, leading down a narrow hallway to the basement door. "This is a bad idea," I muttered to myself, but duty overrode fear, and I followed. The basement door creaked as I opened it, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. My flashlight flickered, which was strange because I'd replaced the batteries just that morning. As I stepped onto the first stair, a sound stopped me in my tracks. A faint, raspy whisper. "Help! Me! Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The whisper came again, louder this time, but it wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from behind me. Spinning around, I shone my flashlight back down the hallway, but it was empty. The door to the basement slammed shut behind me, and the whisper turned into a low, guttural growl. I drew my gun, my hands shaking as adrenaline coursed through my veins. "Whoever's there, come out now." The growling stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I tried the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. My flashlight flickered again, then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, straining to hear anything. Footsteps, breathing, anything. And then, I felt it. A cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around blindly, firing 2 shots into the darkness. The gunshots echoed violently, and in their brief flashes of light, I saw something. A figure, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. And then, it was gone. When my flashlight miraculously flickered back on, the door was open, and I didn't waste a second bolting up the stairs and out of the house. The truck was gone. My cruiser was gone. I was alone. "Dispatch, do you copy?" I yelled into my radio, but all I got was static. I ran down the dirt road, my lungs burning and my mind racing. When I finally reached the main highway, I flagged down a passing motorist who called for backup. When other officers arrived, we went back to the farmhouse, but there was no sign of the truck, no footprints, and no basement door. Just an empty, rotting shell of a house. I filed my report, but I knew no one believed me. They chalked it up to exhaustion or stress. I even started doubting myself. Until 2 weeks later, when Lisa, my partner, went missing. Her last known location? The Carter farmhouse. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night, but I've never gone back, and I never will.
It seems like a slab.
When I became a police officer in rural West Virginia, I thought I was ready for anything. I'd grown up in the area, a place of winding roads, dense forests, and a community where everyone knew everyone. Crime here was low, but strange occurrences weren't unheard of. Still, nothing prepared me for the night I confronted something I can't explain, a night that still haunts me years later. It was a quiet Tuesday in late October, the kind of night where the air felt heavy, and the trees stood like silent sentinels in the darkness. My partner, Officer Dave Miller, and I were patrolling the outskirts of town, near an area known as Hollow Ridge. The locals avoided it, muttering about bad luck and strange happenings. "Superstition," Dave had scoffed when we got the assignment to patrol there. "Nothing but moonshine stories." I agreed, mostly to keep the conversation light. But deep down, the stories had always unsettled me. People spoke of missing hikers, strange lights in the woods, and an eerie sound that echoed through the valley late at night. An unnatural, bone-chilling whistle. At around 11:45 p.m., our radio crackled to life. "Unit 45, we've got a report of a disturbance near the old Wexler cabin. Possible trespassing. Can you check it out?" Dave glanced at me, his grin a mix of annoyance and excitement. "Wexler cabin. Isn't that place condemned?" "Yeah," I said, reaching for the radio. "Unit 45 en route." The drive up to the cabin was rough. The dirt road was narrow, barely wide enough for the cruiser, and the forest seemed to close in around us. The headlights illuminated gnarled branches that looked like clawed hands reaching out to snatch us. When we arrived, the cabin was as unsettling as I remembered from childhood dares. It sat in a small clearing, its roof sagging and windows broken. The wooden planks were gray and splintered, and the front door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. We stepped out of the cruiser, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. "Doesn't look like anyone's home," Dave muttered, his tone uneasy, despite his earlier bravado. "Let's check it out," I said, my hand instinctively resting on my holstered gun. The interior of the cabin was worse than the outside. The floorboards were warped, and the walls were covered in graffiti and strange symbols I didn't recognize. Broken furniture was scattered across the room, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. "Hello? Police department," Dave called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. That's when we heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from upstairs. We exchanged a look, and I could see the tension in his jaw. Drawing our weapons, we moved cautiously up the narrow staircase, each step groaning under our weight. The tapping grew louder as we approached the second floor. It was coming from the far end of the hallway, where a single door stood slightly open. My pulse quickened as I motioned for Dave to cover me. I pushed the door open, gun raised, and froze. The room was empty except for an old rocking chair that moved back and forth on its own. The tapping sound came from one of its wooden legs striking the floor. "Wind," Dave whispered, though there wasn't so much as a draft in the room. Then we heard something else, a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "What the hell?" Dave muttered, his flashlight darting around the room. Before I could respond, our radios crackled with static, followed by a voice that wasn't dispatch. It was distorted, broken, and filled with an emotion I can only describe as despair. "Leave. Now." The radio fell silent. Dave stared at me, his face pale. "That's not funny, man," he said, though I hadn't touched my radio. "Let's get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. We turned to leave, but the moment we stepped into the hallway, the door slammed shut behind us with a force that shook the walls. The air grew unbearably cold, and I swear I could see my breath. Then came the whistling. It started faint, like the sound of wind through the trees, but it quickly grew louder, more piercing. It didn't sound human. It was erratic, rising and falling in unnatural pitches, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Dave shouted something, but I couldn't hear him over the sound. My flashlight flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness. I reached out blindly, my hand finding Dave's shoulder. "We need to move," I yelled, though my voice felt swallowed by the oppressive noise. We stumbled down the stairs, each step feeling like a mile, and burst out of the front door into the cold night air. The whistling stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. Panting, we reached the cruiser, but when I went to grab the radio, it was dead. Even the engine wouldn't start. "We're walking," Dave said, his voice barely above a whisper. We set off down the dirt road, flashlights cutting through the inky blackness. But no matter how far we walked, the cruiser seemed to remain just behind us, always in view. Panic set in. We turned around, running back the way we'd come, but the cabin was there instead of the cruiser. The whistling began again, distant at first, then closer, more urgent. I don't know how long we wandered, hours, maybe longer, but eventually, we stumbled out onto the main road, where another officer found us. We tried to explain what had happened, but our story sounded insane, even to me. When we returned to the cabin with backup, it was gone. The clearing was there, but the building itself had vanished, as if it had never existed. Dave left the force a few months later, unable to shake what we'd experienced. I stayed, though I've avoided Hollow Ridge ever since. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. All I know is that something unnatural lurks in those woods, and it's better left undisturbed. I didn't believe in ghosts, curses, or anything supernatural. I was a cop, after all, someone who dealt in cold, hard facts. But the night of my last shift in Harrow County changed everything. I still wake up drenched in sweat, reliving every moment of what happened. It started like any other night. Harrow County was a quiet place, a rural stretch of farmland and woods, dotted with small, sleepy towns. Crime was low, and most nights, my job consisted of pulling over the occasional drunk driver or responding to noise complaints. That night, I was covering the midnight to dawn shift alone. My partner, Officer Garrett, had called out sick, so it was just me cruising the lonely highways in my squad car. The radio chatter was sparse, and the roads were empty. At around 2:30 a.m., I got the call. Unit 13, we've got a report of a possible intruder at the old Morton Mill. Caller says they saw someone moving around inside. Could be a squatter. Can you check it out? The Morton Mill was about 10 miles out of town, a hulking, abandoned relic of the 19th century that had been left to rot after a fire gutted it decades ago. Kids dared each other to sneak inside, and locals whispered about it being haunted. But I'd been there before. It was just a crumbling building full of graffiti and rusted machinery. Copy that, dispatch. I'm en route. The drive to the mill was uneventful, but the place always gave me the creeps. It loomed in the darkness like a sleeping giant, its blackened beams silhouetted against the moonlit sky. I parked my cruiser near the entrance and grabbed my flashlight. The air felt heavy as I stepped out, colder than it should have been for late spring. My boots crunched on the gravel as I approached the gaping doorway. Police department. Is anyone here? I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. No response. Inside, the mill was as I remembered it. Rusted equipment, piles of debris, and a suffocating smell of mold and decay. My flashlight beam danced over the walls, illuminating graffiti and scorch marks from the fire. I was halfway through my sweep when I saw it. A faint light flickering in the distance, near the back of the mill. It was dim and erratic, like the flame of a candle struggling against the wind. Hello? Police, I called again, moving toward the light. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The air grew colder, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water. When I rounded the corner, the light vanished, leaving me in darkness. I swept my flashlight over the area, but there was nothing, just an empty space where the light had been. That's when I heard it, a faint, rasping whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. It was coming from above me. I tilted my flashlight up, and my heart nearly stopped. Perched on one of the old beams was a figure. Its body was gaunt and twisted, like it had been broken and put back together wrong. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light of my flashlight, and its mouth hung open in an unnatural grin. "Get down," I shouted, drawing my gun. The figure didn't move. It just stared at me, its grin widening, and then it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was like nails on a chalkboard, and it echoed through the mill, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I fired a warning shot, and the sound was deafening in the enclosed space. But when I looked back, the figure was gone. My flashlight flickered, and the temperature dropped even further. My breath came out in visible puffs, and a deep guttural growl rumbled through the air. "Dispatch, I need backup at the Morton Mill now," I yelled into my radio, but all I got was static. Suddenly, the growling stopped, replaced by a high-pitched scream that seemed to come from inside my own head. I stumbled backward, my flashlight falling to the ground, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying outside the mill, my gun and flashlight beside me. My cruiser was still there, but the radio was dead, and my watch had stopped at 3:03 a.m. I don't remember driving back to the station. The next thing I knew, I was sitting at my desk, staring at the clock. It was 6:45 a.m., and the morning sun was streaming through the windows. "Rough night?" Chief Harris asked, clapping a hand on my shoulder. I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I tell him what I'd seen? He'd never believe me. Later that day, I drove back to the mill with Garrett. But when we arrived, the place looked different. The graffiti. My name is Officer Mike Thompson, and I've been with the Elmwood Police Department for 8 years. I've seen my fair share of bizarre cases, but nothing could prepare me for what happened on that fateful night. The night that changed everything. It was a chilly November evening, and the kind of fog that clings to your skin had settled in over Elmwood. My shift had started at 10 p.m., and I was assigned to patrol the more remote areas of town. Most of the folks were tucked in for the night, and the streets were mostly deserted, save for the occasional stray cat darting across the road. Around midnight, I received a call from dispatch. "Unit 34, we've got a report of a possible break-in at the old Anderson house on Maple Street. Caller states they heard glass shattering and footsteps inside. Can you check it out?" I knew the Anderson house. It had been abandoned for years, left to decay after the tragic deaths of the family who lived there. The rumors about the place were rampant. People said it was haunted, that the spirits of the family lingered in the walls, but I was never one to buy into ghost stories. Still, I felt a shiver run down my spine at the thought of going there alone. "Copy that, dispatch. I'm on my way," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The drive to the Anderson house was uneventful, but as I turned onto Maple Street, the atmosphere shifted. The fog thickened, wrapping around my cruiser like a shroud. I parked in front of the house, its silhouette looming against the night sky. The windows were dark, and the front door hung slightly open, swaying gently in the breeze. "Just the wind," I muttered to myself, grabbing my flashlight and stepping out of the car. The moment I stepped onto the porch, I felt an odd sensation, like a cold hand brushing against my back. I shook it off, convinced it was just my imagination. I knocked on the door and called out, "Police, is anyone in there?" No response. I pushed the door open and entered the house, the floor creaking under my weight. My flashlight beam danced across the dust-covered furniture, revealing cobwebs and shadows. The air was stale and thick, filled with the smell of mildew and decay. "Dispatch, I'm inside the Anderson house. No sign of anyone yet," I reported, keeping my voice steady. As I moved deeper into the house, I noticed something odd. There were no signs of a break-in, no broken windows, no overturned furniture. Yet I could clearly hear the sound of footsteps, echoing from the upper floor. "Hello?" I called again, the unease creeping in. The footsteps stopped. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the air around me. Something was wrong. I headed for the staircase, every creak of the old wood sending chills down my spine. As I ascended, the sound of my own heartbeat filled my ears. At the top of the stairs, I found a long hallway with several closed doors. The footsteps had come from the room at the end of the hall. I moved cautiously, my flashlight illuminating the peeling wallpaper and dust-covered frames on the wall. I reached the door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The room was empty, save for a single rocking chair in the corner. It rocked back and forth slowly, as if someone had just vacated it. My pulse quickened, and I stepped further inside. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and I spun around, my heart racing. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I pounded on the door. "Dispatch, I'm locked in. I need assistance." But all I received was silence. Turning back to the room, I noticed the temperature had dropped drastically. I could see my breath in the air, and a chill ran down my spine. I aimed my flashlight at the rocking chair, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the shadows, stood a figure, a woman, her face pale and hollow. She wore an old-fashioned dress that looked as if it had been plucked straight from the 1920s. Her eyes were dark, sunken into her skull, and her mouth opened in a silent scream. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want?" I gasped, the words barely escaping my lips. The figure raised an arm, pointing towards the corner of the room. I followed her gaze and saw a dark shape, a small, ragged doll lying on the floor. It was covered in dirt, its button eyes gleaming in the beam of my flashlight. "Please help me," the woman whispered, her voice like a distant echo. I shook my head, desperate to break free from this nightmare. "What do you want from me?" But as I looked back, she was gone. The rocking chair had stopped moving, and the room was silent once again. I banged on the door with all my might, desperation flooding through me. "Someone, help, let me out." Finally, the door swung open, and I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. My heart raced as I found Officer Garrett standing there, his face a mask of concern. "Mike, are you okay?" he asked, eyes wide with worry. "I saw her," I managed to choke out, shaking from head to toe. "Saw who?" "The woman in the dress. She was right there." Garrett's expression turned serious. "Mike, let's get out of here. We need to talk." As we headed back downstairs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But just as I reached the front door, I heard it again. The footsteps. They were right behind us. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just shadows dancing along the walls. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, panic rising again. Garrett nodded, looking uneasy. "Yeah, let's move." Once outside, I leaned against the cruiser, trying to collect my thoughts. "You won't believe what I saw. She was..." Before I could finish, the radio crackled to life. "Unit 34, we have a situation. We need you back at the station. A woman matching your description has been reported missing for over 50 years. My blood ran cold. "Her name was Lila Anderson," the dispatcher continued. "She disappeared from her home the night of a fire that claimed her family. They've been trying to find her for decades." I felt the weight of those words settle over me, like a dark cloud. The woman I saw, the woman in the dress, was Lila. As I stood there, the fog rolled in thicker than before, swallowing the cruiser and the surrounding area. I glanced back at the Anderson house, its silhouette fading into the mist. "Let's go," Garrett urged, his voice low. We drove back to the station in silence, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lila's spirit was still trapped in that house, seeking something she could never find. The next day, I dug deeper into the Anderson family's history. I learned that the fire had been ruled an accident, but whispers of foul play lingered. Some said Lila had been trying to escape the house, while others believed she had been taken by someone she trusted. A few weeks later, I was called back to the Anderson house, this time with a team of paranormal investigators. They wanted to document any supernatural activity, and I reluctantly agreed to accompany them. As we entered the house, I felt a familiar chill wash over me. We set up cameras and began our investigation, but as the night wore on, nothing happened. It seemed like the rumors of hauntings were just that, rumors. Then, at around 2 a.m., I heard it, the faint sound of a woman's voice calling out, "Help me! Help me!" The investigators and I exchanged glances, and my heart raced. I knew that voice. "Lila?" I whispered. my breath hitching in my throat. We followed the sound, moving towards the staircase, but just as we reached the top, the power went out, plunging us into darkness. "Get your flashlights out!" I shouted. But before I could react, the air turned frigid, and I felt a strong gust of wind sweep through the hallway. The whispering intensified, filling the air with a chorus of desperate pleas. "Help me, please." The investigators were panicking, and I could see the fear in their eyes. "We need to get out," one of them yelled. But before we could move, the door to the room where I had first seen Lila slammed shut. I rushed to the door, pounding on it, desperate to escape. "Lila, we're here to help you," I shouted, but the whispers grew louder, drowning out my voice. Suddenly, the door flew open, and I stumbled into the room. The rocking chair began to move again, but this time, Lila was there, her face twisted in anguish. "Please help me," she cried, reaching out for me. I felt a surge of compassion wash over me. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Find the truth," she whispered. "Find my family." Before I could respond, the room darkened, and I felt a heavy weight pressing down on me. The investigators were screaming, and I could hear them rushing out of the room. I turned to follow them, but Lila's grip tightened around my arm. "Please, don't leave me," she begged. In that moment, I realized that she wasn't just a spirit. She was a mother, searching for her lost family. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stand firm. "I won't leave you, I promise." But the weight of the darkness grew heavier, and just as quickly as it had come, it vanished. I found myself standing alone in the empty room, the rocking chair still. I ran outside, my heart pounding, where the investigators were already waiting. They looked terrified, and I knew I wasn't the only one who had experienced something that night. As we left the Anderson house, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lila was still there, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. The case became my obsession. I dug through archives, interviewed old neighbors, and pieced together a story of tragedy and betrayal. Months passed, and finally, I was able to close the case. I discovered that Lila's husband had been involved in shady dealings, and the fire that claimed their lives had been set to cover up his crimes. When I returned to the Anderson house to inform Lila, I felt a sense of peace enveloping me as I stood in the room where I first saw her. "I've found your family," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I felt a warmth surround me, and I knew she was finally free. Though I still patrol Elmwood, the memories of that night never fade. Lila taught me that some stories linger beyond the grave, and some souls never truly rest until their truth is told. My name is Officer Jamie Turner, and I've been on the force in Maplewood for over a decade. Like any small town, Maplewood had its share of drama, but for the most part, it was a quiet place. But one night, everything changed. I'll never forget the events that unfolded, a night that still haunts my dreams. It was late October, and a heavy fog rolled in, enveloping the town in a thick shroud of mystery. The air was crisp, and leaves crunched underfoot as I made my rounds. My partner, Officer Reynolds, had called in sick, leaving me alone to patrol the back roads. The only sounds were the faint rustling of trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. Around 11 p.m., I received a call from dispatch. "Unit 25, we have a report of a suspicious person seen near the old Harper Woods. Can you check it out?" Harper Woods had been a topic of local lore for years. Tales of strange noises and ghostly sightings had frightened many townsfolk, and kids dared each other to venture into the woods at night. I'd always dismissed those stories as mere superstition, but a chill crept down my spine as I drove toward the entrance. As I pulled into the parking lot, my headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the skeletal trees. The woods loomed ominously, and I could feel a sense of unease settling in. I parked my cruiser and grabbed my flashlight, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. Unit 25, on site at Harper Woods, I reported, stepping out of the car. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I shivered as I switched on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. The trail into the woods was narrow and overgrown, the shadows swallowing the path ahead. As I walked deeper into the trees, the air grew heavy, and an eerie silence surrounded me. No rustling leaves, no animal sounds, just an overwhelming stillness. "Dispatch, I'm heading down the main trail," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt silly talking into the radio, but it was a habit ingrained in me. I walked for about 10 minutes when I heard it, a soft, almost melodic whisper drifting through the trees. I stopped in my tracks, straining to make out the words, but they were indistinct, like a song sung too far away to understand. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. Nothing, just the whispering, growing louder. My heart raced as I shone my flashlight in every direction, but there was no one there. I felt a shiver run down my spine as the whispers coalesced into something almost coherent. "Help us. Help us." I took a deep breath, shaking off the dread that crept into my mind. "This is Officer Turner. If someone is lost, I'm here to help." The whispers stopped abruptly, plunging me back into silence. I felt a pang of panic. Maybe this was just a prank. I turned on my heel, ready to head back to the cruiser, when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, barely illuminated by my flashlight. It was a woman, her face obscured by shadows, her clothes tattered and dirty. My instincts kicked in, and I approached cautiously. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I asked, trying to sound calm. She didn't answer, but instead took a step back into the darkness. My heart pounded as I followed her. "Wait, I'm here to help." But as I stepped into the clearing where she had stood, she vanished. I scanned the area, my flashlight beam flickering, and a wave of dread washed over me. This wasn't right. I needed to get out of there. Just as I turned to leave, I heard it again. The whispering, now louder and more urgent. "Help us. Help us." I felt a pull toward the sound, an inexplicable need to find its source. Against my better judgment, I ventured deeper into the woods, the whispers guiding me further into the darkness. Minutes felt like hours as I walked, my flashlight flickering more violently. I was about to turn back when I stumbled into a clearing. In the center lay a decrepit cabin, half collapsed, with vines creeping up its sides. The door hung ajar, and I felt drawn to it, an irresistible urge to step inside. I approached the cabin, my breath quickening. "Is anyone in there?" I called, my voice shaky. "Help us." The voice was clearer now, resonating in my mind like a mantra. It was coming from inside. I hesitated, knowing I should call for backup, but the urgency of the plea consumed me. I stepped inside, the door creaking ominously behind me. The air was thick with dust and decay. "Hello?" I called again, moving deeper into the cabin. Shadows danced around me, and I could barely see through the layers of grime on the windows. In the corner of the main room, I spotted a small child's toy, a worn-out teddy bear. It lay on the ground, dirty and forgotten. As I bent down to pick it up, the whispering surged around me, and I felt cold fingers brush against my arm. I jumped back, adrenaline surging through me. Who's there? The cabin trembled, and suddenly, the walls echoed with anguished cries. Help us! Help us! I stumbled backward, fear gripping my heart. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me as the whispers morphed into screams, filling my ears with an unbearable cacophony. Get out! Get out! I banged on the door, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. In that moment, I understood the stories. The whispers were real. The spirits of those who had vanished in these woods were trapped, seeking help that would never come. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a loud crash echoed through the cabin, and the door swung open. I bolted outside, my heart racing as I stumbled onto the path. Dispatch, I need backup, I shouted into my radio, my voice shaky with fear. I sprinted toward my cruiser, adrenaline pushing me forward. As I reached my car, I turned to look back at the cabin. The whispers were fading, replaced by an eerie silence, but I knew they were still there, waiting for someone to listen. I jumped into the cruiser, slamming the door shut, and fumbled for the radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Turner, I need... But before I could finish, a figure appeared in the fog, the woman from earlier, her face pale and hollow. She stared at me with wide eyes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Help us, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the static of the radio. I slammed the door, locking it tight as fear consumed me. The woman faded into the fog, and I revved the engine, determined to get out of that cursed place. As I drove away, I could still hear the whispers in my mind, a haunting reminder of the souls trapped in Harper Woods. They were calling for help, their pleas echoing in the silence of the night. When I returned to the station, I reported the incident, but my colleagues looked at me like I was losing my mind. They brushed off my claims, attributing it to the fog and my imagination. But I knew what I had experienced was real. That night marked a turning point in my life. I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits of the woods would always be there, waiting for someone to remember them. Weeks passed, and I found myself avoiding Harper Woods. The whispers haunted my thoughts, and I couldn't help but feel that the more I tried to forget, the more they clung to me. One rainy evening, I received a call about a missing child, a little girl named Lily. The search led me back to Harper Woods, and dread filled my stomach as I approached the entrance. I couldn't ignore the whispers any longer. They were calling me back. The search party combed through the trees, calling Lily's name, but the woods swallowed every sound. As the hours passed, hope faded, and I felt a heavy weight in my chest. Then, just as I was about to give up, I heard it, the soft, familiar whisper. Help us. Lily? I called out, following the sound through the trees. The whisper guided me deeper into the woods, and I found myself at the old cabin once more. The door stood open, inviting me in. Lily? I shouted, stepping inside. The cabin was dark, the air thick with an unsettling energy. Where are you? I cried, my voice echoing in the stillness. As I searched the room, I spotted the teddy bear from before, lying in the corner. I picked it up, feeling a strange warmth radiate from it. Suddenly, I heard a giggle, a soft, childlike laugh coming from the shadows. Lily? A small figure emerged from the darkness, her hair disheveled, dirt smudged on her face. She held the teddy bear tightly, her eyes wide with innocence. I was playing, she whispered, her voice soft. Relief washed over me as I rushed to her. We've been looking for you. Come on, let's get you out of here. But as I turned to leave, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of desperate cries. Help us, help us. I felt a tug at my heart, a pull towards the spirits of the woods. They were warning me, trying to show me something. I glanced back at Lily, and for a brief moment, I saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't just lost. She was one of them. "Lily, we need to go," I urged, but she remained still, staring into the darkness. Suddenly, the cabin shook, and I heard the sound of laughter, a haunting echo that filled the air. The walls seemed to close in around us, and I knew we had to escape. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door, but it slammed shut once more. The walls were closing in, the whispers now a cacophony of terror. "Help us! Help us!" With a surge of determination, I slammed my shoulder against the door, and it burst open. We stumbled outside, the fog swirling around us like a living entity. "Run!" I shouted, dragging Lily with me as we sprinted back toward the main trail. The whispers grew frantic, echoing behind us. "Help us!" We finally reached the parking lot, and I threw Lily into my cruiser, locking the doors behind us. As I started the engine, I glanced back at the woods. The fog thickened, obscuring the cabin from view. "Lily, are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded, clutching the teddy bear tightly. They wanted me to play. I didn't know what to say. The weight of the whispers hung in the air, a reminder of the darkness lurking just beyond the trees. I drove away, determined to put as much distance between us and Harper Woods as possible. In the following days, the search party recovered Lily's parents, who had been frantically searching for their daughter. They were overjoyed to have her back, but I knew deep down that Harper Woods would never let go of its secrets. To this day, I avoid that cursed place. The whispers still haunt me, echoing in my mind like a ghostly reminder of the souls trapped within. I tell myself it was just a story, a figment of my imagination. But every October, as the fog rolls in and the leaves crunch underfoot, I hear their pleas once more. "Help us! Help us!" My name is Officer Mike Lawson, and I've been with the City Police Department for over 15 years. I thought I'd seen it all. Domestic disputes, drug busts, even a murder investigation that shook our small town to its core. But nothing prepared me for the night I encountered the unexplainable. It was a chilly night in early November, and I was assigned to the late-night shift. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant howl of a train echoing through the night. My partner, Officer Stevens, had called in sick, leaving me alone to patrol the less populated areas of our jurisdiction. Around midnight, I received a radio call from dispatch. "Unit 12, we've got a report of suspicious activity near the old Miller farm on the outskirts of town. Can you check it out?" I rolled my eyes. The Miller farm had been abandoned for years, a crumbling relic of a time long past. The stories about it were the stuff of local legend, whispers of ghostly sightings and strange noises that made people avoid the area after dark. But I was a cop, and my job was to investigate, no matter how silly the call sounded. As I drove down the narrow, unpaved road leading to the farm, a dense fog began to settle in, wrapping around my cruiser like a thick blanket. The headlights struggled to penetrate the haze, casting eerie shadows that danced along the trees lining the road. When I arrived at the Miller farm, I parked my car and stepped out, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my boots, echoing in the stillness. The farmhouse loomed ahead, a dilapidated structure with boarded-up windows and an overgrown yard. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam slicing through the fog, illuminating the remnants of the once thriving homestead. "Unit 12, on site at the Miller farm," I reported into my radio, trying to sound nonchalant. "No signs of disturbance so far." As I approached the house, I felt an unusual chill in the air, a sense of foreboding creeping up my spine. I walked around the perimeter, shining my light through the gaps in the boarded windows. The inside was dark, but I could make out shadows moving across the walls. "Dispatch, I'm going to enter the building for further investigation," I said, my heart racing a little faster. I knew the dangers of entering abandoned places, but something compelled me to push forward. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. It creaked ominously, and I stepped inside, the stale air thick with dust and decay. The flashlight beam revealed old furniture draped in white sheets, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling like tattered curtains. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, frozen in an era long gone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. There was no response, only silence. I made my way through the living room and into the kitchen, where the sink was filled with murky water. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, each step sending a shiver of dread coursing through me. Just as I turned to head back, I heard it, a soft, distant sobbing coming from upstairs. My heart raced. I strained to listen, and the sound grew louder, more desperate. "Help! Help me!" I felt a surge of adrenaline. Someone might be in trouble. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, I think I've found someone in the house. I'm heading upstairs." As I climbed the creaking staircase, the sobbing became clearer, echoing down the hall. It was coming from one of the bedrooms at the end. I approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called out, trying to sound brave. "Help, please." The voice whimpered again, sending chills down my spine. I pushed the door open, and the scene that greeted me was nothing short of horrific. The room was dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through the cracked window. In the corner sat a young woman, her clothes tattered and dirty, her eyes wide with fear. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Please help me. They won't let me go." Who won't let you go?" I asked, stepping closer. "I don't know. They're here. They're watching me." She pointed toward the corner of the room, and my blood ran cold. I turned to look, and the room seemed to shift. Shadows flickered in the corners, shapes moving just out of sight. I felt a tightness in my chest, a primal instinct to flee. "Stay here. I'm calling for backup," I said, reaching for my radio. But before I could press the button, the woman stood up, her expression twisting into something unrecognizable. "No, you can't leave me. You have to help me." Her voice grew frantic, almost monstrous, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and I spun around, panic rising. "What the hell?" I shouted, banging on the door. "Open it!" But it wouldn't budge. The shadows in the room began to close in, and the woman stepped toward me, her movements jerky and unnatural. "You're not supposed to be here. You have to help me," she screamed, her voice echoing in the small room. "Get back!" I yelled, my instincts kicking in. I pulled my firearm from its holster, aiming it at her. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you come any closer." She paused, and in that moment, I could see her eyes were not filled with fear, but something darker, something that sent a shiver down my spine. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with disembodied voices, all pleading, all crying for help. "Help us," they cried, drowning out everything else. I took a step back, feeling the oppressive weight of the shadows around me. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before me. "What do you want?" But the woman only smiled, her features contorting into a grotesque grin. "You can't save her. She's one of us now. In that moment, I felt the air shift, and a presence surged around me. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker, more suffocating. I had to escape. With a surge of adrenaline, I charged at the door, slamming my shoulder against it with all my might. The door cracked open just enough for me to slip through, and I didn't look back. I ran down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. "Dispatch, I need backup immediately," I yelled into my radio, my voice shaking. "Unit 12, what's your location?" Dispatch replied, concern lacing their tone. "I'm at the Miller farm. Send units now." I could feel the darkness closing in around me as I sprinted toward the exit. When I burst outside, the cool air hit me like a slap, and I gasped for breath, the whispers fading behind me. I made it to my cruiser and jumped in, locking the doors. I frantically turned the ignition, desperate to get away from that place. Just as I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back at the house. The fog had thickened, shrouding the building in an otherworldly haze. For a brief moment, I thought I saw the woman standing at the window, her eyes locked onto mine, a haunting look that promised I had not seen the last of her. I drove back to the station, my mind racing. When I arrived, I reported the incident to my sergeant, but he dismissed it as stress from working alone on the night shift. "Just take a break, Lawson. You'll be fine," he said, not understanding the depth of what I had experienced. But I knew the truth. Something dark resided in that house, something that fed off fear and despair. The woman was gone, but the whispers remained, echoing in the back of my mind long after I left the Miller farm. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I avoided the area, but every so often, I'd hear the whispers in the wind, the cries for help that would not let me rest. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, and I felt the weight of the shadows pressing in on me. One night, about a month later, I received another call about suspicious activity at the Miller farm. My heart sank as I listened to dispatch. "Unit 12, we need you to respond to a report of lights in the windows of the Miller farm. Witnesses say they see people moving around." Against my better judgment, I drove back to that accursed place. The fog was back, thicker than ever, and as I approached the farmhouse, I could see lights flickering in the windows. My heart raced, a mix of fear and dread filling me. I parked the cruiser and stepped out, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The whispers returned, a haunting melody that echoed in my mind. "Help us. Help us." I approached the front door, which stood slightly ajar. The lights inside flickered like dying stars. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered, but the whispers swelled around me. I stepped inside, and the room was transformed. The dust and decay had vanished, replaced by warm light and the sounds of laughter. Children's voices echoed in the hall, a chilling contrast to the despair I had felt before. "What the hell is going on?" I muttered, my heart racing. I moved through the house, the warmth enveloping me like a comforting embrace. I could see silhouettes moving in the shadows, but when I turned to look, they vanished. "Help us!" The voices called out again, growing more desperate. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. The illusions faded, and I was back in the dark, dilapidated house. The shadows crept closer, the cold air returning with a vengeance. "No!" I screamed, scrambling for the door. I burst outside into the night, the whispers now a cacophony of cries echoing behind me. I ran to my cruiser and jumped in, slamming the door shut. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The farmhouse stood dark and silent, shrouded in fog, but I swore I could see a figure standing in the window, watching me leave. That was the last time I ever went back to the Miller farm. The darkness still lingers in my mind, a reminder of the horrors that unfolded there. I tell myself it was just a figment of my imagination, a product of working too many late nights. But deep down, I know the truth. Something evil resides there, waiting for its next visitor, whispering promises of help and companionship. And I can't shake the feeling that it will always be watching. I've been a police officer in a small Midwestern town for nearly a decade. My job has taken me to the darkest corners of humanity, but nothing prepared me for the case that would change my life forever. This story isn't one I tell often, but it haunts me every day. It was late October, the time of year when the days grew shorter and the nights longer, cloaking our town in an early darkness. The air was crisp, and Halloween decorations dotted the neighborhood, giving it a festive but eerie vibe. The streets were lined with leaves, the vibrant colors slowly giving way to decay. My partner, Officer Mark Harris, and I were assigned the night shift that fateful evening. Around 11 p.m., as we cruised through the quieter residential areas, dispatch received a call about a disturbance at an old, abandoned house at the edge of town. The place had a notorious reputation among locals, rumored to be haunted since the previous owners mysteriously vanished years ago. Unit 14, you're responding to a possible break-in at 731 Elm Street. Proceed with caution, the dispatcher instructed. I glanced at Mark, who raised an eyebrow. You want to check it out? He asked, his tone a mix of skepticism and intrigue. Why not? It's Halloween. Maybe we'll catch some kids messing around, I replied, trying to sound casual, though a sense of unease crept into my stomach. We arrived at the old house, the once grand structure, now a shadow of its former self. We parked the cruiser and stepped out, the night air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The moon hung low, casting an eerie glow over the broken windows and sagging porch. Stay close, I whispered, pulling my flashlight from my belt. As we approached the front door, it swung open with a creak that echoed through the stillness. I hesitated, exchanging glances with Mark. Hello? I called out, my voice firm, despite the chill running down my spine. This is the police. Is anyone there? No response. The silence felt oppressive, wrapping around us like a thick fog. I led the way inside, stepping over the threshold into a dimly lit foyer. The air was stale, and the faint scent of mildew filled my nostrils. As my flashlight beam danced across the walls, I noticed faded wallpaper peeling away, revealing the bare, rotting wood beneath. Let's check the upstairs, I suggested, though I felt a twinge of dread at the thought. Mark nodded, and we cautiously ascended the creaky staircase, each step echoing ominously in the quiet. The upper floor was even darker, the only light coming from our flashlights. I pointed mine toward the first door on the left. It was slightly ajar. Let's see what's in here, I said, pushing the door open. The room was empty, but as I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. A layer of dust coated everything, yet a small area on the floor appeared disturbed, as if someone had been pacing there. Check this out, I called to Mark, crouching down to inspect it. Just as I was about to call him over, I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound coming from the far end of the hallway. Did you hear that? I asked, my heart pounding. Yeah, it came from the other room, Mark replied, his voice barely above a whisper. We exchanged nervous glances before cautiously moving down the hallway. I pushed open the door at the end, and my flashlight illuminated what looked like an old study, filled with broken furniture and cobwebs. But there, in the corner, sat an old rocking chair that seemed to sway back and forth, though no one was in it. Okay, that's creepy, Mark muttered, stepping back. Suddenly, the air turned frigid, and I felt an unshakable sensation of being watched. I shined my flashlight around the room, my hands trembling slightly. "We should go back downstairs," I suggested, my voice wavering. As we turned to leave, a loud crash erupted from the room behind us, making us jump. "What was that?" I shouted, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Let's check it out," Mark said, though he didn't sound convinced. We approached the source of the noise, and I shined my light into the room. To our horror, a bookshelf lay toppled on the floor, its contents scattered. In the dim light, I saw something glimmering among the debris. I stepped closer, bending down to pick it up, and my stomach twisted. It was a small locket, its surface tarnished but recognizable. "This belongs to Sophie Henderson," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Sophie was a girl who had disappeared from our town years ago, along with her parents. Rumors had spread, but no one had ever been able to solve the case. "Are you serious?" Mark asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What's it doing here?" Before I could respond, I felt a sudden chill wash over me, and the lights in the room flickered ominously. "Let's get out of here," I urged, pocketing the locket. As we turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper, barely audible. "Help me." I froze, fear gripping my heart. "Did you hear that?" I asked Mark, my voice trembling. "Hear what?" he replied, scanning the room. "The whisper. It said, 'Help me.'" Mark shook his head, his eyes darting around nervously. "We're just hearing things. Let's go." Reluctantly, I followed him back to the staircase, but the moment we reached the bottom, we heard a loud thud from upstairs. It echoed through the empty house, sending a wave of dread crashing over us. "Let's get out of here," I shouted, sprinting toward the front door. We dashed outside, the cool night air hitting us like a wave of relief. But just as we reached the cruiser, the whispers returned, now louder and more insistent. "Help us! Help us!" I slammed the door shut, locking it as we jumped inside. "What the hell was that?" Mark gasped, staring wide-eyed at me. "I don't know, but we need to report this," I said, my hands shaking as I reached for the radio. But before I could speak, the locket slipped from my pocket, falling to the floor. The moment it hit the ground, the whispers intensified, filling the cruiser. "Pick it up," Mark yelled, panic rising in his voice. I bent down to grab it, and as my fingers closed around the cold metal, I felt an overwhelming rush of emotions: fear, sadness, and an unshakable sense of loss. It was as if the spirit of Sophie herself had reached out to me through the locket. "We need to get back to the station," I said, my voice trembling as I started the engine. As we drove away from the house, the whispers faded, but they lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at my conscience. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to find out what had happened to Sophie. Back at the station, I spent hours digging through old case files, piecing together the fragments of the past. The Hendersons had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions. No one had ever found any evidence of foul play, and the case had grown cold over the years. That evening, I returned to the abandoned house alone, determined to confront whatever was haunting that place. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and the locket, I stepped inside once more. The air felt heavy, almost electric, as I made my way through the familiar shadows. "Show yourself," I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. "I'm here to help." But the only answer was the soft creaking of the old house settling. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and I pressed deeper into the heart of the darkness. As I reached the study, the temperature dropped drastically, my breath visible in the air. I took a deep breath and held up the locket. "I have this," I said, my voice steady despite my fear. I want to help you find peace. Please, if you can hear me, show me what happened." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the lights flickered, and a figure appeared in the corner of my vision. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. "Stop playing games. I'm trying to help you." Suddenly, the air grew thick, and the whispers erupted into a cacophony of voices, swirling around me, crying out for help. "Help us! Help us!" I stumbled backward, clutching the locket tightly. "What do you want?" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, everything fell silent. The darkness seemed to shift, coalescing into a shape before me. A young girl appeared, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes filled with sorrow. It was Sophie. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a mere breath on the wind. "I want to help you. What happened?" I pleaded, my heart racing. The shadows around her twisted and morphed, revealing glimpses of a terrifying scene, a dark figure looming over her and her parents, the fear in their eyes as they were taken away into the darkness. Suddenly, the vision shifted, and I found myself standing in a graveyard, surrounded by tombstones. I gasped as I recognized the names: Sophie and her parents, buried together, their lives cut short. "No, you're dead," I realized, my heart shattering at the truth. "I need you to tell them." Sophie's voice echoed in my mind. "Tell them what happened, so I can finally rest." And just like that, she vanished, leaving me standing alone in the study, the weight of her plea pressing heavily on my shoulders. The next morning, I returned to the station and gathered my fellow officers. I shared everything I had experienced: the whispers, the visions, and Sophie's message. At first, they were skeptical, but the urgency in my voice caught their attention. "We need to investigate this further," I insisted. "There's a chance we can find out what happened to her and give her family the closure they deserve." Together, we pieced together the puzzle, digging deeper into the Henderson family's disappearance. It led us to a long-buried secret, a dark history of the house that involved an unspeakable tragedy and a connection to the criminal underworld. Weeks later, with the evidence we collected, we finally had enough to reopen the case. The truth unraveled like a dark tapestry, revealing the horrors that had transpired in that house so many years ago. As we brought the case to light, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Sophie and her parents finally had their story told, and justice was served. Though I never returned to the Miller house, I kept the locket as a reminder of the night that changed everything. The whispers faded, but the impact of that night stayed with me, a testament to the ghosts that lingered long after the living had forgotten. And while the darkness still whispers occasionally, I know I did what I could to help them find peace. In the end, it reminded me that sometimes the most chilling cases are not just about solving crimes, but about giving a voice to the silent witnesses who still long for justice. As a police officer in a quiet town in southern Illinois, I always thought I had seen everything. I had patrolled the streets during the night shifts, responding to petty thefts, domestic disputes, and the occasional bar fight. But one case changed everything, making me question not just the world around me, but also the reality of the life we lead. This story has haunted me for years, and even now, as I recount it, I can feel the shadows creeping back into my mind. It was a chilly evening in late November when my partner, Officer Jameson, and I were called to investigate a series of strange occurrences reported at a local cemetery. The calls started with a woman claiming she heard whispers and laughter coming from the graves after dark. Most of the locals dismissed her as an overactive imagination, but the number of reports started to pile up. As we drove towards the cemetery, I could see the gates looming ahead, the iron bars coated in rust, and the ground covered with a thin layer of frost. Jameson parked the cruiser at the entrance, and we stepped out into the night air, the crunch of gravel beneath our boots breaking the silence. "Ready to deal with some ghost stories?" Jameson said with a smirk, but I could tell he was uneasy. "Let's just check it out," I replied, trying to keep my own nerves at bay. We walked through the narrow paths, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The headstones, old and weathered, stood like sentinels watching over the dead. An unsettling feeling washed over me as the wind rustled the leaves, creating an almost eerie symphony that seemed to echo through the graves. "Maybe we should split up," Jameson suggested, attempting to lighten the mood. "Bad idea. Let's stick together," I insisted. I wasn't keen on wandering alone in a place like this, especially with the stories I had heard. As we made our way deeper into the cemetery, the atmosphere grew heavier. The air was thick with something I couldn't quite place, an unsettling tension that made my skin crawl. Then, just as we approached an old mausoleum, we heard it. A soft giggle, unmistakably the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the night. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Yeah, sounded like it came from over there," Jameson said, pointing toward the far end of the cemetery. Against my better judgment, I followed him as we walked toward the sound. We reached a cluster of graves marked by faded flowers and forgotten memories. The laughter faded, replaced by a distant whispering, like a conversation just out of reach. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. There was no answer, just silence. I felt a chill run down my spine as the wind picked up, causing the branches of the nearby trees to sway ominously. Just then, a shadow flitted across my peripheral vision, darting between the graves. "Did you see that?" I exclaimed, turning to look at Jameson. "Yeah," he replied, his bravado evaporating. "We should get back to the cruiser." Reluctantly, we turned to leave, but as we made our way back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The whispers grew louder, and I could swear I heard a child calling my name, a soft, haunting voice that tugged at my heart. "Let's just get out of here," Jameson urged again, and I nodded, sensing his fear. But before we could reach the entrance, we heard it, the unmistakable sound of a child crying. It was faint, echoing through the stillness of the night. My instincts kicked in, and I turned to face the sound, unable to ignore the plea for help. "Wait," I said, looking back at Jameson. "We can't just leave." "Are you serious? It's just a ghost story," he protested. "Or it's a lost kid," I replied, my heart pounding as I followed the sound deeper into the cemetery. We approached an old oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The crying was louder now, and I could see a faint glow near the base of the tree. My flashlight flickered as I got closer, revealing a small figure huddled beneath the branches. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, my heart racing as I knelt down. The figure looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a little girl, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her lips trembled as she pointed toward the mausoleum. "They're coming for me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Who's coming?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "The ones in the shadows," she replied, her gaze darting around as if she could see something we couldn't. Jameson looked at me, his face pale. "We need to call this in," he said, pulling out his radio. But as he turned away, the girl suddenly vanished, leaving only the echo of her cries behind. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. "Where did she go?" I asked, bewildered. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," Jameson insisted, his voice urgent. We hurried back to the cruiser, my mind racing with questions. Who was the girl? Why was she here? And why did she seem to be so terrified? As we drove away, I couldn't shake the image of her face from my mind. I knew I had to come back, to uncover the truth behind the whispers and the child's cries. The following day, I went back to the station and pored over old case files, trying to find any information about missing children or unsolved cases in the area. That's when I stumbled across a case from the early 1980s. A young girl named Lily had vanished from her home, the last known sighting being near the old cemetery. Her disappearance had never been solved, and the case had grown cold over the years. I felt my stomach twist as I read the details, piecing together the fragments of a tragic story. Determined to find out more, I visited the cemetery again that night, armed with the case file and a flashlight. The air felt heavier this time, as if the cemetery itself was holding its breath. I approached the mausoleum, the old structure looming ominously in the moonlight. "Lily," I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. "If you're here, please show yourself." For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. Then, the air shifted and the whispers returned, growing louder and more frantic. "Help me. Help me." The shadows seemed to coalesce around me, and I felt a surge of energy, drawing me toward the mausoleum's entrance. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, the old hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. My flashlight beam revealed a small room filled with forgotten relics, old photographs, letters, and a child's toy. As I stepped further inside, I found a small wooden box in the corner, partially buried under dust. I opened it cautiously, revealing a collection of trinkets and faded notes. But one object caught my eye, a small locket, its surface tarnished but still intact. I opened it, and my breath hitched in my throat. Inside was a picture of a young girl with bright eyes and a smile that lit up the room. It was Lily. Suddenly, the whispers grew deafening, echoing around me. "Help me. Help me." I felt a presence behind me, cold and desperate. "Lily," I called out, my heart racing. "I'm here," the voice replied, soft and sorrowful. "You have to find them. You have to help me." "Help you with what?" I asked, my mind racing. "The shadows. They took me. They're still here. They won't let me go." I felt a wave of despair wash over me as I understood the gravity of her words. The shadows weren't just a figment of my imagination. They were real, and they had trapped her spirit. "I promise. I'll find a way to help you," I vowed, determination filling my heart. As I stood there, I felt a surge of energy, and the locket began to glow, illuminating the darkness of the mausoleum. The whispers quieted, replaced by a sense of peace washing over the room. "Thank you," Lily's voice whispered, filled with gratitude. With that, the presence faded, and the whispers dissolved into silence. I stood alone in the mausoleum, my heart heavy but hopeful. I knew what I had to do next. The following weeks were filled with a relentless pursuit of the truth. I dug deeper into the case, interviewing locals who had lived in the area during the time of Lily's disappearance. Each conversation revealed more about the shadows that had loomed over the cemetery. Stories of strange happenings, of children playing where they shouldn't, and of dark figures lurking in the night. Finally, I pieced together enough evidence to warrant a full investigation into the cemetery's history. We uncovered a chilling connection to a series of unsolved disappearances dating back decades, all linked to that same haunting ground. After a month of relentless searching and investigation, we discovered a hidden entrance beneath the mausoleum. It led to a series of tunnels, long forgotten and overgrown with time. Inside, we found evidence of a dark and sinister secret that had plagued our town for far too long. The shadows that had whispered in the cemetery were not just echoes of the past. They were remnants of a tragedy that had scarred the community, and now they had been exposed to the light of justice. As the dust settled and the truth emerged, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. Lily's spirit had been freed, and the echoes of the past could finally rest. Even now, as I reflect on that night, I can still hear her whispers, a reminder of the darkness that can linger long after the living have moved on. But I also know that sometimes facing those shadows can lead to a light brighter than we ever imagined. I've been a police officer for over a decade, and I thought I'd seen it all. The drunks, the domestic disputes, the occasional drug bust. But nothing prepared me for the night I received a call that would change everything. It was a typical Friday night shift in our small town in Kentucky, a place where everyone knew everyone else, and crime was rare. My partner, Officer Garcia, and I were stationed in the cruiser, drinking lukewarm coffee and joking about the latest gossip around town. The radio crackled to life, breaking the monotony. Unit 23, we have a 10 to 50 at Mill Creek Road, requesting backup. I glanced at Garcia, who raised an eyebrow. A 10 to 50 indicated a vehicle accident, which was unusual for that area. Mill Creek Road was a winding, desolate stretch that cut through the woods, far from the main roads. "Let's roll," I said, turning on the lights and siren as we sped toward the location. The closer we got, the more uneasy I felt. Mill Creek was notorious for its dark history, a stretch of road where several accidents had occurred over the years, often accompanied by strange tales and eerie encounters. As we arrived at the scene, I could see a crumpled car off the side of the road, its headlights still illuminating the trees surrounding it. A small crowd of bystanders had gathered, murmuring among themselves. I could see a figure slumped against the vehicle, and my heart raced as I rushed toward them. It was a young woman, her face pale and smeared with blood. She was conscious but dazed, her eyes flickering as she tried to focus on me. "Help, please," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Stay with me, okay? What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "There was someone in the road," she gasped, her breath coming in quick bursts. "I swerved to avoid them, and then I don't remember." I signaled for Garcia to call for an ambulance while I checked her injuries. She had a deep gash on her forehead and some bruising around her arms. Just as I was assessing her condition, she grabbed my arm tightly, her eyes wide with fear. "He's still out there," she cried. "He was standing in the middle of the road, and then he just vanished." "Who? Who was standing in the road?" I asked, my gut tightening. "A man. He looked lost, like he didn't belong. I thought I was going to hit him." Before I could respond, I heard a voice behind me, a gruff man's voice, asking questions. I turned to see a burly figure emerging from the crowd. He was a local, known to everyone in town. "Did you see what happened, Charlie?" I asked, recognizing him. He shook his head, his brow furrowed. "I was just driving by. I didn't see anything until after the crash. But I heard something earlier, like a scream. It was real eerie out here." The woman's grip on my arm tightened again. "You heard it too?" she asked, her voice shaking. Garcia returned from the cruiser, radioing for an ambulance, while I continued to comfort the woman. "You're going to be okay. Help is on the way." But as I glanced around, a sense of dread settled over me. There was something wrong with the air, an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. The crowd was murmuring among themselves, casting glances into the trees, as if they were waiting for something to happen. The ambulance arrived shortly after, and I helped paramedics load the woman onto a stretcher. As they took her away, I felt a strange compulsion to stay behind, to look into the woods where the young woman claimed the figure had disappeared. "Stay close, officer," Garcia called out, sensing my hesitation. "We need to finish the report and clear the scene." "I'll be right back," I replied, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the shadows. I stepped away from the lights of the ambulance, the darkness swallowing me as I moved further into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I felt my heart race as I ventured deeper, my flashlight cutting through the blackness. It was eerily quiet, the only sound being the crunch of leaves underfoot. Then I heard it, a low, mournful cry that echoed through the trees, chilling me to the bone. I hesitated, trying to locate the source of the sound. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I pressed on, compelled by a mixture of curiosity and dread. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" The cry came again, closer this time. I could see a figure moving in the distance, just beyond the trees. It was a man, standing motionless, his back turned to me. He appeared to be staring at something on the ground, and a chill washed over me as I approached. "Sir," I said cautiously, "are you all right?" He didn't turn around. Instead, he continued to gaze into the darkness. I felt a deep sense of unease settle in my gut as I stepped closer, trying to get a better look at him. "Sir, can you hear me?" I repeated, my voice firmer this time. Suddenly, he turned around, and my blood ran cold. His eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his skull, and his skin was pale, almost translucent. He looked like a specter, a ghost wandering the woods. I stumbled back, my heart racing as he opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, a horrific scream erupted from his throat, piercing the silence of the night. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the ground as I sprinted back toward the cruiser. The darkness seemed to close in around me, the trees bending and twisting as if they were alive. I could hear the man's screams echoing behind me, a haunting sound that chased me through the woods. When I reached the cruiser, Garcia was standing outside, looking around nervously. "What the hell took you so long?" he demanded. "I thought I heard something back there." "I saw someone. A man," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. He looked like he was dead, and then he screamed." Before I could finish, the radio crackled to life again, and the dispatcher's voice broke through. "Unit 23, we have a report of a missing person in the area. A male, approximately 30 years old, last seen near Mill Creek Road. Please advise if you see anything suspicious." Garcia and I exchanged glances, the gravity of the situation hitting us both at once. "That's the same area where the accident happened," he muttered, his expression turning serious. We jumped back into the cruiser and headed down Mill Creek Road again, the tension thick in the air. My mind raced with thoughts of the girl, the man, and the strange events unfolding around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was lingering in the shadows. We arrived back at the scene, where the wrecked car still sat, surrounded by the lingering glow of the ambulance lights. The paramedics were gone, and the bystanders had dispersed, leaving only the echoes of their hushed conversations. Just then, my radio crackled again. Unit 23, we have a confirmed sighting of the missing person. Last seen running into the woods near Mill Creek Road. Proceed with caution. I felt a cold wave wash over me as I turned to Garcia. We need to find him, I said, determination surging through me. As we stepped back into the woods, the air felt charged, as if the very ground beneath us was alive. We moved cautiously, flashlights sweeping the darkened trees, searching for any sign of the missing man. The echoes of our footsteps were the only sounds, each crackle of twigs beneath our boots feeling louder than the last. Did you see anything unusual? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Garcia shook his head. Just the trees. I don't like this. We continued deeper into the woods, and as we reached a clearing, I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye. There, in the distance, I saw a figure, shrouded in shadows, standing by a large tree. Over there, I exclaimed, pointing. We moved toward the figure cautiously, adrenaline surging through me. As we approached, the figure began to turn, and my heart sank as I recognized him. It was the missing man, his face pale and gaunt, eyes wild with terror. "Are you all right?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at us, his gaze frantic. "You have to help me," he cried, stumbling toward us. "It's not safe. They're coming." "Who's coming?" I asked, confusion and fear swirling within me. "The shadows," he screamed, glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting something to leap out at him. "I can't let them get me." Suddenly, the air felt charged, electric. I looked around, feeling a growing dread as I sensed a presence looming behind us. The man's eyes widened, and he stepped back, trembling. "No, stay away," he shouted, collapsing to the ground in panic. I turned, scanning the darkness, but I saw nothing. "Sir, you need to calm down. We're here to help you." But he only continued to shake, staring wide-eyed into the blackness. Garcia moved closer to him, trying to